MULATSCHAG.
You rolling? Mm-hmm. All right, so you're Neil Patrick Harris? Nah, you heard that quite often, right?
No, that's the first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the first. Usually it's I get asked if I'm related to Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, there you go.
But that, I'm not.
He's not that well known in Austria and Europe.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Do you still like fish?
Fish?
Because you said before the band took off, you were selling fish.
You know, I do, but it took me some years to eat shrimp again because I boiled so many shrimp for so many years. I'm back on it now.
Did you ever did some, I don't know, shrimp party to love, hate, get that out of your mind kind of?
No, it was just the smell, you know, because when you steam shrimp, the spice gets in your clothes, and every time I would smell that particular spice, I would just get upset. Yeah, so.
You're known as a notorious bookworm ever since you were a kid. You got a son now yourself. Do you read to him? Like
sure.
books you read yourself?
Let's see. A lot of the books he reads are books I didn't, read growing up. But, it's a work in progress. He's gonna like science fiction, whether he likes it or not. So, we'll see.
Well, speaking of science fiction, you're also quite into that. But things have changed in sci-fi over the years. I mean, let's say back in the days, it was about reaching beyond whatever. Now it's more dystopia, is it?
Well, I think science fiction is always an indication about current social situations. I mean, if you look at Star Trek, that was very much Star Trek was very much a kind of post-World War II visions of utopia, United Nations, and then nowadays you see a lot of things about zombies, which I think has a lot to do with people, the Earth realizing that we're a closed system, and someone can get sick across the globe, and the next thing you know, there's an epidemic.
Yeah.
Nothing you need to worry about.
Nah, so you don't talk with your boy about stuff like that?
If he asks the questions, it's amazing what they learn, and you don't just by overhearing stuff. But, I think you usually, at the end of the day, science fiction is drama. So you have to exaggerate for effect. Otherwise, it wouldn't be entertaining, really.
Well, that's something, exaggeration, that's something you have to do writing lyrics, right?
Sure. I mean, you have to take liberties with the truth. And I've always kind of approached lyrics as storytelling, because it's easier to do that night after night after night as opposed to lyrics that are strictly emotional. I mean, if I had to sing, some emotionally based thing, I think that would get pretty boring.
Ever thought on doing that, stuff like that? Or was there, I don't know, a girl, a lady you would have needed to?
No, to be honest, the other part is that my life has been so, fortunate in a lot of ways that it doesn't make for good material. I've been pretty lucky. So I think that's why I gravitate towards fiction. And besides,
so you mean
I think I'd rather keep, I like a certain level of privacy. Yeah. You don't want to, nowadays it seems people want to put everything out there publicly. And I kind of yearn for the days when people knew the fine art of keeping it to yourself.
There's this Barbarella song. Is it addressed to your son in a little bit? Is it inspired by?
I guess, yeah, probably in a way. I mean, if I wouldn't have written those lyrics that way when I was 20. But I saw that song as sort of like there's X-Ray Visions, and then Firebirds are part 1 and 2, and Barbarella's part 3, where it's 20 years later. and the same character is then kind of trying to impart this wisdom to his son, saying, don't be like I was, which is a very familiar trope in a lot of ways.
It's a 68 movie. Jane Fonda, absolutely fabulous in that movie.
Well, you know, I remember seeing it when I was a teenager, and when I came up with the idea of Barbarella, because I've always loved like Heavy Metal Magazine and Boris Vallejo and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, I should watch the movie before I finish writing lyrics. I only got about 40 minutes into it. I had to stop. It's so bad. She's gorgeous and beautiful, but the movie is atrocious.
You need to be drunk watching it.
Oh, at least drunk, at the very least.
Yeah, those were wild times. Remember that, 68, probably every artist was taking whatever drugs there were new.
There seemed to also be a lot of movies that were made when they started filming and they didn't even have a script. They just thought that the LSD would write it for them. And usually those movies aren't very good.
Nah.
You still, at the end of the day, have to have a good plot.
Yeah, it's that old saying, when you have a wild party and you thought, wow, I wrote this great song last night, and then you read it the next day and it's shit.
Oh, I have notebooks full of that. Most of it I can't even read my handwriting. These genius ideas.
What's harder for you to deal with, broken bone or writer's block?
Ooh, I would say probably writer's block. I mean, a broken bone. I mean, you know what it is. You know what the problem is. Writer's block. You never know what the problem is. I mean, and I love writing lyrics, but at the same time, it also can be the most frustrating thing. But when the idea finally does come, it's very rewarding. It's sort of like it's like a really bad relationship. You have good times and bad times.
Oh, did you have let's say a writing streak where you wrote down 20 songs in a day or two?
Sometimes it sort of seems like it's feast and famine, where I think if I sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a song right now, it never happens. But if I'm sitting in my car in traffic, that's when the ideas come, when you're not thinking, not trying. Thankfully, as much as I think iPhones are a digital leash, it's good to have something to be able to talk into really, really quickly. And you usually have it right there.
Yeah. You have to nowadays.
Yeah, and it's a good, it's almost like a journal in some ways, as long as you can keep a record. So, it's always a learning process, and I don't think there's ever a point where you figure out, like, oh, this is what I need to do. It's always a struggle.
Yeah. One other thing, Prong was a band that inspired you guys in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
Ever jammed with Tommy Victor or collaboration whatsoever?
We toured with Prong a number of times, and we haven't done any collaboration per se, but I think maybe he's played with us on stage once or twice, and we still see him around. He's the same guy. And that's one of the reasons Clutch got its name, is we wanted a name that was just one syllable, like Prong. Someone suggested Clutch, I don't remember who it was, and that was that.
Prong, and they named themselves after a priest song.
Oh, really?
The Green Manalishi.
What is it?
The
three-prong crown. That's such a great song.
Oh, yeah.
The Fleetwood Mac version I heard just the other day, and it's so strange in a good way.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Speaking of inspiration, of course, on the other hand, you guys are around more than 25 years now. Of course, you have inspired musicians yourselves. Like Mastodon, they love telling, wow, they inspired us so much. We were there at their show. They even played support.
Yeah, that's, I think, the ultimate flattery. Sure, having shows is great. Putting out records is great, but when someone says, I wrote a song, or your influence is now part of what I do, that's kind of like immortality in a way. It's but it's also very humbling. You realize you're just a very small drop in a big ocean, and if you can ripple out somehow, that's great. I mean, that's priceless.
Yeah. And I guess also with your songs, because you don't really have that one big hit, something that sells you. You really have your audience that grows with you, that goes with you, and that has their own hits.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes I think the worst thing that could happen to a band or an artist is to have that one huge song, especially right at the beginning of their career, because then they have to kind of live up to that, or they expect that. And with us, we just have a whole slew of songs, and people have their favorites, and it allows us to change up our set lists. If there's anything that comes close to it, it would be Electric Worry. And we play that pretty much every night for that reason. Yeah. But there's also another 16 songs that we change up.
You've experienced something every younger metal musician would envy you. You were touring with Pantera.
It was us and Neurosis and Pantera. And it was on their Great Southern Trendkill tour.
Oh, there you go.
And, these places were enormous. And a lot of times, the crowd wasn't too crazy about us. And we kind of had an attitude like, okay, if you don't like us, we're going to make you hate us. And sometimes we would sit on a riff for 15 minutes just out of spite. And in hindsight, that wasn't a very cool move. We should have tried a different approach. But when we rolled through towns the next time, there was a lot of fans there. And same could be said for the Marilyn Manson tour, which is around the same time. It seemed like it was a terrible fit at the time. But in hindsight, it was great because we came back to towns and there was a lot of people there that had heard of us because of that opening act, despite our collective bad attitudes.
Oh yeah, that would have been a great package today.
But it was great, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to do it.
How was it backstage, honestly? Because Dime was known for doing pranks on support bands.
Well, it was pretty nuts, and we kind of steered clear of it as much as we could because we're pretty low key, and I don't think we could compete with their level of after show raging. So there is that. Occasionally make some kind of a wise decision.
Yeah, but you have it in your vita, put it that way,
Yeah, it's especially now. I mean, I think we've always been pretty chill. I mean, sure, maybe 20 years ago it was a bit more, you go to the bar after the show, but I can't do that anymore. Yeah. After the show, I want to go to bed.
Yeah, one more thing. Your sister Mary, she did Ace of Cakes. Did you watch it?
Yeah, sure. We actually, Duff, she had known him from college, and the very first wedding cake that he ever did was for my wife and I. And that was before the TV show. And, she's no longer there. That I think she's gone on to do other things, but it was surprising to see a crossover between rock and roll and cake. But that's what happened. Because it's kind of a universal thing. Who doesn't like cake? Me, myself, I prefer pie, but I don't want to be too controversial.
How is it now? I mean, touring, so close to Christmas. Do you eat a lot of cake on tour?
I try not to. It's when you're 20 years old, you can eat all you want and drink all you want, and nothing happens really. But now the body doesn't process it quite like it used to. So I try to eat more things that grow out of the ground, instead of coming out of a tube. So it's a work in progress. It's by no means perfect.
You're going to be home for Christmas?
Yeah, we're going to get home on the 23rd. And then we leave again on the 27th. We do 5 shows between Christmas and New Year's, and then we'll have January and February off.
All right. Can we have a quick idea?
Sure, no problem.
MULATSCHAG.
Hey everybody, this is Neil Fallon from Clutch, and you are watching MULATSCHAG, the only TV you need.
MULATSCHAG.